Welcome to ConVerses. If you're just finding this, I strongly encourage you to watch the Gospel of the Covenant series first. There's important foundation built there that may be necessary to understand the concepts we'll be referencing as we study these apparently contradicting verses in the New Testament. Today we're going to get into a fun one, narrowing in from the overarching ideas of faith and righteousness to a specific subpoint of food. Nothing outside a person defiles him by going into him, but the things that come out from the man is what defiles him. Well, there it is, the biblical support for ribs and shrimp cocktails. That is, if we believe these common assumptions built from this verse. 1. Yeshua can end and redefine God's definition of food in his word. 2. Yeshua is setting law-keeping Pharisees straight by internalizing all Torah commands to matters of the heart. 3. We define koinosai to mean unclean. The consistent interpretation has been proclaimed that this verse proves Yeshua is clearly defining all food can now be freely eaten with no more restrictions according to the Torah instructions of what is permissible to eat. But let's look at another verse related to this issue, involving one of the very disciples that was present at this teaching moment. Peter said, "Surely not, Adonai, I have never eaten anything common or unclean." This famous line comes from when Peter saw the vision with something like a sheet, or really a basket, full of all kinds of animals, both permissible and prohibited. And the voice of Adonai instructed him to eat. Now we won't go into the purpose of this historically misunderstood vision today, but let's just note the apparent contradiction between these two verses. Yeshua instructs his disciples that it is okay to eat anything you want, it won't make you unclean. But after 10 years of being filled with the same Spirit as Yeshua, Peter is still disobeying him in favor of a Torah-defined diet. Now in this episode, we're going to have to get into the specific words used in the original languages, because surprise, surprise, the actual words used and the words not used really matter in determining the meaning, as does the whole context of the passage. So, in Mark 7, Yeshua seems to say that nothing you eat will make you defiled, which would contradict the list of animals that are defined as prohibited to eat in Leviticus 11, the very Torah laws that he is bound to obey in order to be defined as a sinless Messiah. So something has to give. First, if we look at the Greek, we'll see that the word here is not defiled or unclean, as the ceremonial status of being made impure for the presence of Elohim. The Greek word used is koinosai, to make one common, meaning nothing outside a person makes someone common. There is a significant difference in the classification of being common as opposed to unclean, and you will distinguish between the holy and the common, between the defiled and the pure. Here's a simple visual to provide a basic idea of how these concepts work. Common is the spiritual designation of anything ordinary and natural in the realm of the physical world. Holy is the spiritual designation for anything that is set apart from the ordinary and dedicated to the realm of Elohim. Clean and unclean operate on a different layer within these categories. To be clean is to be ceremonially purified for the approved use or presence of Elohim. To be unclean is to be ceremonially made impure for the use or presence of Elohim. As an example, if you have an ordinary person or item in the common world, they can be dedicated by Elohim or by his representative to be holy. This requires a purification process, whatever is required in the operating administration of Elohim for the world. Then it is purified, or in a clean status in the physical, and holy in the spiritual. that person or thing can still become defiled if it is subject to the criteria that Elohim has called impure for holy items. It downgrades to a status of unclean. In that state, it is not approved for the realm or presence of Elohim. But it has not lost its spiritual holy identity yet. It can go through the prescribed purification process and return to its clean status again, remaining in a pure physical status and in the holy spiritual realm. Now, something common can also be deemed clean for use of a holy person. Example, a holy and ritually purified member of the covenant people can eat a common lamb that is in a clean status, meaning the lamb didn't have to be holy or dedicated for sacrifice to Elohim at the altar. And it must adhere to the physical criteria to be clean, so not diseased, not roadkill, and slaughtered properly by bleeding out. Also, a holy and clean person can sit on common donkeys, wear common wool, work a common garden, and they won't become unclean. But common animals or states of being that are prohibited from holy people or places cannot be made pure for holy use. Example, a leper cannot enter the presence of Elohim until he has been cured of the condition, inspected for 7 days, and ritually washed. Or, a holy person cannot eat a common animal that is not permitted to be food for a holy person, or that holy person will become impure or unclean for the holy realm. In both cases, the leprosy or animal prohibited for food never become permitted or clean for a holy person. The holy person must abide by the holy instructions to remain pure for the realm they are designated for. And furthermore, certain people or things that enter and or remain in what is deemed detestable or abominable by Elohim may not be granted back into the holy realm. Because common things may become holy, but holy things cannot return to common. When holy things are purposely committed to idolatrous or rebellious betrayal, they are not simply returned to common status. They are destroyed. Okay, hopefully we can see the important distinction and a wonderful symbolism for human holiness and purity. But now let's continue with an unexpected question about our Mark 7 verse. Is Yeshua even talking about food going into the body? What is the word here? In Greek, it is oudes, meaning nothing. It is a general participle, not a noun. Oddly, he doesn't use the word food or bread here. The actual text doesn't say, no food can enter you and make you unclean or common. He's literally saying, no thing. Even in the Hebrew translations of Mark, the word is davar, which has the same exact meaning. It's a thing, a matter, or a word. Okay, if that seems insignificant, let's back up and determine the context of the accusation. We have to go to the beginning of this passage to see what's being referred to. The Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Yeshua and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. So the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Yeshua, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their bread with defiled hands?" Now a quick note, almost all English translations will use defiled hands, trying to force an incorrect connection. But in the Greek, it is literally unwashed hands. We'll see why that matters in a minute, but the idea is clear enough. The disciples ate food, specified as bread, without washing their hands. And the Pharisees wanted to scold Yeshua for being a horrible rabbi who would allow such behavior to occur. The only problem is that there is no Torah instruction about having to wash hands before eating. That was only one of the thousands of added religious laws called takanot, man-made instructions layered on top of the Torah and taught as if they are one. That's not my hypothetical interpretation. It's directly in the text, according to the tradition of the elders. Now, it's clearly not a bad practice to wash your hands before eating. And they instructed it for the same reason as we do today, to cleanse impurities from potentially making one sick from bad bacteria getting into your system from your filthy hands. However, they had also instilled the traditional rulings that such potential invisible maladies would also make you ritually impure or unclean, meaning they would deem you to be in the same defiled status as an actual Torah-commanded offense, like for bleeding or leprosy, one that would prevent you from the presence of Elohim in the temple. What Yeshua says is incredibly specific and amazing. He says no thing, as in contact with bacteria, dirt, undercooked meat, unseen microbes with your food, cannot make you common, or into a state that is set for ordinary mammals and Gentiles, ones who are not dedicated for the realm of Adonai. As the teaching continues, for it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come: sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and defile a person. Well, again, from most translations it appears Yeshua is saying these make one ritually impure, like defiled. But guess what the Greek actually uses for defiled here? Koinosai. Yeshua says that these practices define you to be in a status of commonness, not dedicated to Adonai, not holy, when you live like common people. We discussed this definition in the Gospel Part 2 video. Those who live according to self-determinism, dedicated to the kingdom of the world and its practices, which lead to death. How can we be sure that Yeshua isn't making a unilateral change to his Father's definitions and approving of the disciples eating Torah-prohibited food? Because verse 2 and 5 state that they were eating bread. And bread is never prohibited to eat in the Torah. It's not one of the animals listed that would defile one who ate of it. The only possibility for being made unclean or common here is, 1, based on Torah conditions, if the bread was in contact with human blood or rotting animals, or maybe even dedicated to a false god. Or 2, based on man-made regulations that are imposed on top of Elohim's instruction, that the religious rulers deemed the bread defiled due to their human traditions of hand-washing. Now, this isn't a hard case to crack, because the Pharisees literally state it is according to the traditions of the elders. Case closed. It is option 2, a man-made designation of being defiled. And even one more layer of proof, there is no meat involved here. So Yeshua was not making any declaration about reversing the Torah definition of what meat is considered food for his covenant people, because that definition was sealed since Adonai spoke it at Mount Sinai, and Yeshua couldn't dare add to or take away from it. What does this mean for some modern translations that add in verse 19, "In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean"? Well, 1, that is a complete fabrication. There is no record of that in actual Greek manuscripts. 2, it shows dangerous ignorance of the biblical definition of food and of the definitions of clean and common. And 3, it is just blasphemy. Now let's move on to the verse from Acts where Peter declares in righteous defense to the Almighty, "Surely not, Adonai, I have never eaten anything common or unclean." Please look closely. Peter never assumes Adonai is asking him to eat of the prohibited animals in the basket. That's never a thought in his mind. That's why it was so alarming that it had him questioning the creator of the universe 3 times to be sure. You see, if Yeshua had clearly taught his disciples that there's a new God-sanctioned food definition, that you can eat any meat you want, then Peter probably wouldn't have had to argue with the voice from heaven. But you see, the text says there were animals of all kinds, mingling and contacting each other. So when Elohim tells Peter to kill and eat, he's not telling him to suddenly eat a lion or a bear or a dog, because Adonai suddenly changed his mind. He's telling him to eat one of the permissible animals, say one of the sheep, that's been in contact with one of those other animals. But in rabbinic tradition of the day, that contact would make the permissible sheep into a defiled state, resulting in that sheep to have been deemed ritually unclean. Maybe suitable for Gentiles, but not for Hebrews to eat. Which is why Peter says, I've never eaten anything common or unclean. He clarifies that he has not eaten regular common food of the Gentiles, like a prohibited animal, or ritually defiled food, according to the Torah instruction. The answer from heaven in Acts 10:15 is, do not call common what Elohim has made pure. Well, did Elohim actually make all animals pure? Did he create all animals that way, or define them all to be pure in the past? His very voice spoke the instruction to classify certain animals suitable for food and others not pure for food. It is certain that Peter knew that very well. Make a distinction between the defiled and the pure, and between the living creature that may be eaten and the living creature that may not be eaten. So Elohim can't be retroactively declaring that he had made all animals clean to eat in the past, because this whole chapter of Leviticus 11 spells out what must not be eaten for Elohim's covenant people. So what is being said here? The important distinction is in the difference between common and clean. The words made pure in Greek is from the root katharos, the translation of the Hebrew idea of tahor, which is ritual purity, as used in the Leviticus 10 and 11 verse. Elohim is declaring that the animals that he created and deemed to be approved for food can't be defiled or declared common just by their outer skin coming in contact with common things. It is the same message Yeshua was proclaiming to the Pharisees in Mark 7 regarding unwashed hands. But instead he was teaching Peter that it's time to shed the extra religious traditions of cultural separations, ones that rabbinic rules had applied to humans as well. Their human instructions for contact were even more rigorous than animal contact. But they had desired to keep a strict purity halo around themselves when they were washed and ritually pure, not trusting that any Gentile could come within close contact of them in case they had unknown blood on them or some sort of molecules of impurity that would make them impure. And to be clear, this began from a genuine heart and desire to remain pure for the presence of Adonai, as instructed for temple entrance. But it grew into customs and religious traditions that ended up causing a separation that would preclude the Gentiles from joining the body of Adonai's covenant people. And please hear this critical truth, as the actual language and context shows in both passages. The added laws of the religious establishment were not Torah commands, and Yeshua would never teach to disobey those perfect instructions, the Torah. He proves this clearly in Mark 7. You have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. Now let's just think for a second. How could Yeshua set aside the command of Elohim to supposedly declare all food pure based on his own new standard, and then chastise the Pharisees for setting aside the commands of Elohim for declaring food impure based on their own standard? Just think about that. Now, the actual little known detail in this Acts 10:15 phrase is the real clue to the whole meaning of our new paradigm. What Elohim made pure. It signifies that all people are able to be made ceremonially clean now, not through human hands or blood offerings at the altar, but through the heavenly status provided by Yeshua's priestly mediation. How do we know that I'm not crazy in suggesting that? Because that is the expressed written explanation that Peter gives about the meaning of this vision at the end of the chapter. You yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or to visit anyone of another nation. But Elohim has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. So it wasn't to tell Peter to redefine the eternal instructions of what animals are permissible to eat. It was explicitly not to declare any person unclean based on the man-made laws that are referenced at the beginning of the verse. That word unlawful in Greek is athemiton, meaning criminal or illegal. It's not the same word that is used to infer anything against the Torah, because there is no such Torah command for a Jew not to associate with a Gentile. Those were all rabbinic added traditions taught as civil law, which caused religious Jews to apply false definitions to common things, including people. And what's the result of all this? Well, let's use a line from Paul in Ephesians 5. Let no uncleanliness be found among you. The word here is from akatharos. That isn't generic hygiene or invisible germs. That is things that cause you to be unclean in the physical realm according to Torah instruction, like consuming blood, or prohibited animals, or forbidden sexual acts, and idolatry. Think Acts 15:20. Now how would Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, who was the one that even straightened Peter out when it came to reverting to the cultural traditions of rabbinic practice, how would he still teach the Gentiles in Ephesus to remain in Torah-prescribed cleanliness? Maybe because Yeshua didn't change the actual God-prescribed instructions from the Torah after all. And neither did Peter, nor did Paul. Now we can rightfully parse the proposed contradiction. Yeshua instructs his disciples that it is okay to eat Torah-prescribed food without fear of man-made conditions that are purported to make you unclean. But after 10 years of being filled with the same Spirit, Peter is still struggling with the strict cultural mandates that determine Gentiles to be ceremonially unclean by nature. Using this historically accurate definition, we can correct the faulty assumptions. 1. Yeshua cannot end and redefine God's definition of food in his word. 2. Yeshua is setting law-making Pharisees straight by correctly parsing the difference between Torah commands and traditions. 3. We define koinosai to mean common, the opposite of holy. Okay, that's enough to consider for now. I encourage you to share this and study it with trusted seekers of the Word and subscribe to catch the next episode. Until next time, let's pray for the mercy of Adonai to open our eyes to His truth and for the courage to walk in it. Shalom.